Stoicism is one of my favorite schools of ancient thought. It's inspiring, it's rigorous, and it's a veritable repository of timeless wisdom and genuinely good life advice. But lately, YouTube and popular culture in general hasn't been too kind to it, transforming this once noble philosophical behemoth into a dumbed down, memeable, quotable caricature that could only be described as Broicism. And I love that, Broicism. That's pretty good. All those pages with random quotes from Stoic writings and AI generated muscle dudes giving generic life advice and hustle, grind set sort of self actualization crap. You know what I'm talking about. And there are some great videos on Stoicism that cut through all that BS and get past all the inspirational quotes to dive into its fascinating but messy history and philosophy. But in this video, I want to focus on something that I really think doesn't get enough attention when we're talking about Stoicism, and that's God. At its core, Stoicism is a deeply religious, God focused, theistic worldview. In Stoicism, God isn't just in the background, God is everywhere. Literally, that's one of the core metaphysical theses of Stoicism, that God is everywhere. God permeates the universe. But more importantly, the Stoics believed that you needed to understand this in order to actually live a good life. And this is something that modern Broicism completely overlooks. Now, to understand Stoic theology and eventually Stoic philosophy, we need to understand a little bit about the religious background in which it developed. Ancient Greece wasn't exactly a bastion of religious unity. You had the traditional Greek pantheon, of course: Zeus, Apollo, Hera, Aphrodite, all those guys. And those gods were pretty temperamental, to put it mildly, and not very good role models. You can read about all the crazy mischief they got up to in books like the Iliad and the Odyssey. But there were also more philosophical approaches to the divine in ancient Greece. Plato, for instance, introduced the idea of the demiurge, basically a cosmic craftsman who created the world in accordance with the eternal forms. This Platonic dualism between the material physical world on the one hand and the transcendent eternal realm of the forms on the other would go on to dominate much philosophical thinking in the Western tradition for millennia. But at the time, it was by no means the only option for thinking about God. For example, you had the Epicureans, who believed that the gods existed but were completely indifferent to human affairs. They lived in perfect bliss, sort of between worlds, and couldn't care less what we got up to as human beings. There were multiple gods, they certainly existed, but they didn't actually interact with the world, and they didn't create it either. The Epicurean gods just sort of float around in godly protoplasm and live blissful, perfect lives. And then you had the Peripatetics, who followed Aristotle. They believed that God was the unmoved mover and originator of the universe. And for them, God was more of a logical, abstract necessity than a physical or non physical being. It was a logical construct that could be used to explain the creation and eventual dissolution of the world. God created the world, sure, but he did so logically, as the first cause, not as a mythological craftsman or demiurge a la Plato. The Stoics rejected all of these options and went on to develop a truly unique conception of God for its time. They offered a vision of God that was both a reaction to and a development of some of these other ideas that were floating around ancient Greece at the time. And they didn't buy the Platonic demiurge or the Epicurean hedonistic blissful gods or even Aristotle's logical conception of God. They wanted something totally different. So, what did the Stoics actually think God was like? First off, they believed that God was the rational, organizing principle of the entire cosmos. God wasn't a being that just so happened to be rational like us. Rather, God was rationality itself, working through the cosmos. God is what makes the universe make sense. God is what gives the universe its order and structure. Now, where the Stoics really diverged from their peers was in believing that God was active, not passive. Unlike Plato's demiurge that created the world and then just stepped back, or Aristotle's unmoved mover, the Stoic God was constantly working in the universe and in the world around us. God is doing things all the time. In fact, God is doing everything all the time, according to the Stoics. And this leads to one of the most radical and I think fascinating aspects of Stoic theology. God is immanent, not transcendent. God isn't sitting around in another world pulling the cosmic strings. Rather, God is the cosmos itself. God is everywhere, and I mean that literally. God is in every single particle in the universe. And God is what gives the universe its structure. And there's some philosophy to back this up. The Stoics were what we call corporeal materialists, or just corporealists. They believed that only matter could influence other matter. They believed that only material things could act or be acted upon. And since God clearly acts and influences the universe, then God too must be material. And this led to the Stoic formulation that God is what matter is. Whatever our account of matter, that's also going to be our account of God, according to the Stoics. Now, metaphysically, things get kind of tricky because the Stoics believe that God is everywhere, but he also created the universe. For all the other schools of thought, it was one or the other. God either created the universe and didn't do much else, like with Plato or Aristotle, or God was immanent and everywhere, but didn't actually create the universe, like with the Epicureans. So the Stoic position almost sounds like a contradiction. God is what matter is, so God is everywhere because matter is everywhere, but God also created the universe, which means that God must have created the matter around us, but God is also identical to the matter around us. So it's a metaphysical puzzle that kept Stoic philosophers busy for centuries. How can God be coextensive with matter without being identical to it, but also creating it at the same time? It's a real head scratcher. And the answer is that the Stoics took a left turn when they thought about how God created the universe. Mainstream Western traditions like to think about the divine creation of the universe in terms of craftsmanship. God is a sort of cosmic architect that creates the world around us out of matter that was already here. God sort of just shapes things in accordance with his design. And this is definitely the case for Plato's demiurge and for the Judeo-Christian God that we find in Genesis, which went on to influence Christianity, which went on to influence the Western world as we know it. So this idea of God as the architect runs really deep. But the Stoics used a completely different metaphor when thinking about how God created the universe. And that metaphor was biology. For the Stoics, God created the world in the same way that sperm creates human life. And as an aside, the ancient Greeks back then didn't realize that you needed a sperm and an egg to make human life. They just thought that you only needed the sperm. The sperm would grow into a human being, and the womb just sort of incubated it. So yeah, weird ancient biological sexism. The genetic information contained within the sperm, or the zygote more accurately, guides the development of that human life from its embryonic form through childhood to adulthood and all the way till death. And this design isn't imposed from the outside. It's contained within every cell in a human body from the very first one. Our genes are actively guiding every single cell in our bodies right now, for the duration of our entire lives. And it all began with a single cell that grew and multiplied countless times. And for the Stoics, that's how God works. The universe isn't a machine that God built. Rather, it's a living organism that God is. God is like the genetic code of the cosmos, present in every part and guiding its development from within. This happens through something called pneuma, literally breath or spirit. Pneuma is the rational, active material that pervades the universe, connecting everything to everything else. And this breath or spirit is actually part of the physical cosmos. So this isn't necessarily a Platonic dualism or even a Cartesian substance dualism. It's supposed to be a dualism that exists within the material realm. This is where the idea of corporealism comes from. And metaphysically, it's tricky, and there are some people who think that Stoics never actually figured out how to make sense of this idea, but that's at least what they were going for. And just like any other living thing, the universe goes through cycles. It develops, it matures, and it eventually undergoes what the Stoics call a conflagration, or a great cosmic fire that burns everything up so the cycle can begin again. So God didn't just create the universe once. God is actually constantly in the process of creating the universe and bringing it to the end of its next cycle. And this brings us to one of the most important concepts in Stoicism, fate. Now, when most people hear fate, they think of a sort of script that their life is supposed to follow, or the way that their life is predetermined to go. But for the Stoics, the concept of fate was very different. For the Stoics, fate was just a chain of causes, but not in the way that we typically think about causation. Much of Western philosophy tends to think of causes in terms of discrete events. A causes B, B causes C, and so on and so forth. But the Stoics saw causation as bodies mutually affecting one another, very often simultaneously, like how the pillow gets compressed as you put your head on top of it. And this leads to what is called cosmic sympathy, the idea that the universe is a living organism connected to itself by pneuma and constantly mutually influencing itself. When something happens in one part of the universe, it affects another part of the universe, sometimes directly, sometimes indirectly, but always necessarily. It's like how when you stub your toe and your entire body responds. Your nervous system, starting at your toe, sends signals to your brain, and you want to yell out something like ouch, or maybe even something more vulgar. Your muscles tense up, your heart rate increases. The stubbed toe affects your entire body because you are one organism and it is part of you. That's how the Stoics saw the universe. Everything is connected because everything is part of the same divine living system. So fate isn't an external compulsion, it's the natural development of this cosmic organism in accordance with its rational nature, which is God. Now you might be thinking, that's all very interesting, even if kind of weird, the idea of God as a sort of cosmic sperm or something. But I thought that Stoicism was about self improvement and learning to focus on what you can control and self mastery and virtue and all that stuff. What does any of this cosmic theology have to do with becoming a better person? And that's a great question that scholars have been debating for decades. Although the answer is actually clearer in the later Stoicism that you might be more familiar with. In later Roman Stoicism, like that associated with Epictetus and Marcus Aurelius, the connection between cosmic theology and personal development is actually pretty tight, and it even comes across in the primary source texts, just maybe not in the parts that you see plastered on the wall at your gym. The basic idea is just that for these Stoic thinkers, you can't possibly guide your life effectively if you don't understand your place and your role in the universe. Here's what Epictetus says about it. Be assured that the essence of piety towards the gods lies in this, to form right opinions concerning them, as existing and governing the universe justly and well, and fix yourself in this resolution to obey them, and yield to them, and willingly follow them amidst all events, as being ruled by the most perfect wisdom. So here, the idea of adjusting yourself to the situation and focusing on what you can control and obeying the will of God go hand in hand. To live the Stoic ideal of focusing on self-improvement and accepting your fate just is to go along with the divine plan of the universe, to go along with the will of God. And this is way easier to do once you understand that God is the rational will of the universe. Nothing is not the will of God, and accepting this is the key to understanding your place in the universe and learning to live within it as effectively as you can. Marcus Aurelius makes a similar point when he argues that injustice is actually a form of impiety because it goes against the just and rational order of the universe itself, the will of God. When we're acting unjustly, we're not merely hurting others, we're also rebelling against the rational order of the universe itself. In other words, we're fighting against God. So in both cases, personal moral failure is understood as a sort of rebellion against the nature of the universe itself. And you can't live in harmony with the universe if you don't understand what it actually is. But in earlier Greek Stoicism, the relationship is a bit murkier, and there's an ongoing debate among scholars today about whether for these early Greek Stoics, the theological cosmology was a necessity for living a good life, or it was just something nice to have. The orthodox view among scholars is that the cosmic theology is necessary for living a good life. You need to get the Stoic metaphysics in order to get the Stoic ethics. You needed to understand your place in the universe and how the universe worked if you wanted to live a good life within it. And again, we see this view solidified in the later Stoic writings. But some scholars have argued recently that Stoic ethics can stand on its own, and that you don't actually need to understand the whole of the cosmic theology in order to live a pretty good life in accordance with Stoic ideals, even for the earliest Stoics. Now, this is a fascinating debate, and you can read about it in the resources that I have linked below, but it seems like the orthodox view is on pretty solid footing. Understanding cosmology is essential for living a good life in Stoicism, but there is a little bit of wiggle room in the answer to the question of why. One argument, again the more orthodox one, is that understanding cosmology helps us understand our place in the universe and therefore gives us the resources to live a fully stoic and virtuous life. But there's another possibility that also appears in early Stoic writings, and this treats understanding cosmology not as something good in itself, but rather as a means to an end. We should learn about cosmology not because doing so will help us make better decisions, but because doing so exercises our rational faculties. And doing that is one of the greatest things a human being can do. So we learn about the cosmos because doing so helps us to realize our full human potential as rational beings, because it's an exercise of rationality. So, insofar as studying cosmology does that, it's only valuable as a means to an end. So, the role of God in Stoicism is pretty complicated, as is much of Stoic philosophy. The Stoic conception of God was, in fact, a reaction to rival theological visions, and it led to some pretty stubborn, if fascinating, metaphysical problems. But it also offered us a pretty gripping alternative to the way that we generally conceive of the relationship between God and the universe as a creator. Instead of God, the craftsman, creating the universe around us from the outside, we get God the sperm, or God the zygote, or God the genetic code, guiding everything from within. And to me, anyway, that's a pretty cool idea, even if it is weird. Maybe that's why I think it's cool. But whether or not you buy the Stoic metaphysics, there's something profound in the Stoic insight that understanding our place in the universe is essential for living a good life. And maybe that's why modern Broicism feels so hollow compared to the real thing. It's missing that cosmic perspective that makes Stoicism a complete philosophy rather than just a hodgepodge of life hacks. The ancient Stoics understood very well that becoming a better person isn't just about individual willpower or mental tricks. It's about understanding what kind of universe we live in and what is our role within it. And for them, that also meant understanding God, not as a distant judge or a CEO of the universe, but as a creative, rational, living force that guides us all, always and forever. And that's a vision of the divine worth taking seriously, I think, whether you're a Stoic or not. Thanks for watching, and if you learned something today, feel free to leave a like and subscribe for more Frank Philosophy.